Oh, welcome everybody. I know people are going to continue to join, but we want to be respectful of time and be done before 3. So if you have just arrived, a few of you just popped in, feel free to share in the chat where you are from and any concerns that you have related to borrowing in these current times that we're going through. We do have just a quick poll for you, if you wouldn't mind. We always like to know why our people are joining us. And are you joining for personal use, for professional use, or for both? Ooh, and New York City is Melitha. Cool. Oh, wonderful. So everybody is joining for personal and professional use, which is pretty common, we have been finding out, but it's always nice to know. So joining me today with presenting is Sarah Krymans. She is a regional educator in financial resiliency. And my name is Samantha Roth, and I also do financial resiliency as well in Scott and Carver counties. So today we are hoping that you are able to understand how to use the debt to income ratio to inform decisions when it comes to whether or not, you are able to do more borrowing or what amount of borrowing you should do. Discover the cost of using credit, fully realizing them, and think about some alternatives to borrowing that there are. So exactly why did we want to do this? Well, with the COVID-19 household debt during the pandemic, there's actually some good news. Credit card balances declined. However, mortgage debt did increase, which isn't too surprising with everybody wanting to get out into their own space with being, the stay-at-home orders. So more mortgages were taken out or adding on. Additions were added on, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, household debt did remain relatively flat during that time. And the percentage of delinquent loans also declined in most consumer debt markets. So there was some good news about debt during COVID-19. However, you'll see that this is from,
January to January.
Yep. So January through January. So it just ended in 2022, showing the pricing on the percent of change for prices of all different items. So you can see here, and not a surprise to any of us, that fuel oil and motor fuel and gasoline types, so energy commodities, have greatly increased. And part of that is also the Russian invasion of Ukraine, not COVID-19, but that has created some issues as well. You'll also notice that, some food items, especially meats, poultry, fish, and eggs, those are the ones that have increased the most. And then used cars and trucks, there's a low inventory. So times continue to change, and we, it's part of the reason why we're doing these webinars. And so as you think about, how has your family's financial situation changed over the course of COVID? Were you one of those who was able to pay some debt down because you stayed at home? Did you increase debt because you bought a house? If you feel comfortable to share, please do. If you don't, just kind of, think over the past couple of years, what has your situation looked like?
And we're such a small group. Folks can either unmute themselves and share, or you can type in the chat box. You should be able to find the chat. Several of you did, but on the lower bar of your screen. Otherwise, go ahead and unmute and share.
All right.
I know for my family, the increased costs. So gas, my office is 60 miles from my house. I am fortunate to work at home a number of days, but when I do drive, that increased gas cost is huge.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. So one person said that they didn't see their spouse and themselves didn't see much of a income loss due to COVID, so they were able to pay some debt down, and another, just paying closer attention to spending than before. So thanks for sharing. Um,
And I think too, Jan, you were able to get some debt paid down because we were all staying home for quite a while, right? So we weren't spending money eating out and we weren't going to the movies and doing other things. So great use of those dollars.
mhm,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. So when we think about, debt, borrowing obviously has a lot to do with, credit scores and debt as well, and credit and debt. But we think about good debt and bad debt. Um, and some debt can help you reach goals and build assets for the future. Um, and sometimes people often say that, borrowing for education or for a reliable car or to buy a home can be a good use of debt. So when you think of debt, what are some of the things that you have considered good debt or bad debt as well? Or when you work with people, I know we have a few people with social services, um, what does that mean for them? It's not always that simple. You need to look at, can that debt benefit of that debt outcome, like a degree, or if it's a training certificate, outweigh the actual cost of the debt. And those beneficial outcomes aren't always guaranteed as well. So if you are thinking about, I know Nancy just shared her son is going to college this year. And that is, expensive. So, think, is taking out a loan for his education going to be a good use of debt, because earning that degree or certification could lead to a better paying job or more job security. But if you do take on the debt and either you don't earn the certificate or degree or aren't able to find a better job, was it still a good debt at that point? And so it's important to, kind of think through, what does that mean? The one thing to know is that there's no one type of debt that is always good or always bad. It really varies on the situation. And it's important to understand how this can help to relate to a goal or a need before you borrow money as well. And then, to shop around to figure out how to pay for what you need, especially large purchases such as a car, or home, before you make a final decision. Um, so we also want to talk about, good debt versus bad debt, but then there's also secured debt versus unsecured debt. Another way, it's just another way to understand it. So secured debt is anything that has an asset attached to it. This asset is given collateral for the loan. When the debt is secured, a lender can take that asset if you get too behind on payments. So an example would be a home mortgage is secured with the home you are buying. An auto loan is secured with a car. If you pawn something, your pawn loan is secured with the item you have pawned, if you've decided to do a pawn loan versus just a flat out pawn. The lender physically holds the item during that amount of the loan. And if you don't make the payments when it's due, the item would be sold for the pawn loan. And an item that's purchased under a rent to own agreement, like a couch or a television, must be returned or it'll be picked up if you don't make the payment. You can also have debt from a secured credit card. It's secured because you have deposited funds into the bank or credit union when you open up the card. So there's already an amount of money to be able to use that secured debt as well. And if you don't pay back the credit card, the bank can then take that money from your deposit as well. So an unsecured debt is pretty much everything else. It doesn't have an asset attached to it. And so if you don't pay these loans, they often will go directly to collections, since there is no assets associated with the loan to be able to repossess. So examples are credit card debt. Most credit cards are unsecured. Any department store charge cards, our medical debt, and our student loans as well would be considered unsecured debt. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in. Sarah and I are both monitoring chat. We do want to make sure that, as we're talking about things, that, terms are understood. And we'll be talking about these throughout the presentation. So the first term is borrower, and that is just the person who is seeking a loan. So the person who will be receiving the money. The lender is the person or an organization providing the loan, can also be called a creditor. So a bank, a credit union are typically lenders for our traditional loans. The principal is the money that you originally agreed to pay back. So if I'm purchasing a car for $23,000, my principal is $23,000 on that vehicle. Interest, well, we're going to talk about interest in a little bit. We also have our annual percentage rate, which is part of the interest, which is the cost of borrowing the principal. So the APR is a standard way to compare how much loans cost. It lets you compare the cost of the loan products as an apples to apples basis. And your credit card company or other loans must disclose the APR before you agree to the use of the card. The interest rate is a credit card's interest rate is the price you pay for borrowing money. Typically for credit cards, they are stated as a yearly rate and it's called the annual percentage rate. Most cards you can avoid paying interest on purchases if you pay off your balance in full each month. And interest is just simply the cost of borrowing money. And then our last one is grace period. So a grace period is a period between the end of a billing cycle and the date your payment is due. This was typically seen on credit cards is that grace period. During this time, you may not be charged interest as long as you pay your balance in full by the due date. Credit card companies are not required to give a grace period. However, most credit card companies do provide a grace period on purchases. So grace periods really, for the most part, only relate to credit card companies. So I talked a little bit about interest and APR, but it's important to know there's simple and compound interest. When you borrow money, that's the amount you use to that is charged to be able to have that money borrowed to you. You can also earn interest. So that's if you have a certificate of a deposit or a savings account or a money market account, they will often have you earn interest as well. Understanding how interest is calculated is important to understand how to borrow responsibility and to grow your investments over time. So one of the things to think about is a simple versus compound interest. So when it is a simple interest, interest is calculated as a percentage of the amount borrowed, which is called the principal interest, and simple interest is calculated only on the principal. So like I said, with my car, if I bought it for $23,000, I would only be paying simple interest on $23,000. Or if it was compound interest, it would be interest on both the initial principal as well as the accumulated interest that happens as well. Okay. So here is an example to help explain what I just said. So let's say you invest $10,000 in a 3-year CD. So this is for us earning interest instead of a loan. It earns 4% interest annually. If where you're having this CD at calculates your interest as simple interest, you would receive $400 in interest at the end of the first year. And then you would receive that same amount of $400 each year until your CD matured for a total of $1,200. However, if you are calculating your interest as compound interest, you would receive $400 in the first year, which is the same as simple interest. However, the next year, the bank would calculate the interest on the principal plus the interest from the first year, which means the 4% would be calculated on the new balance of $10,400. And at the end of 3 years, using compound interest calculator, the total interest would be $1,248.64. So you were able to make another $48.64 of interest using compound interest. The difference comes more significant over a longer period of time. So if this was, calculated over 40 years instead of 10 years, you would receive $38,000 in compound interest versus $16,000 in compound interest. So it's important to think about, like, especially when you're investing, financial educators, we want to say like the power of compound interest. We don't want this on a loan though. So that's important to understand. So how does it add up? So compounding frequency does matter. In the example above, interest was compounded on an annual basis. The more frequently interest is compounded, the faster it will grow, which is not always a good thing when calculating debt instead of savings, as the interest on debt continues to build over time. So here is another example showing, a loan amount at 36 months, 48 months, and 60 months, the APR changing and how much your annual interest will be. And as you can see, with 60 months, that longer length of a loan at 4.9%, you pay about $400 more than the shorter amount of time. So it's important to know how your what interest you are receiving, and understanding the consequences of it. So I might have already answered this question. So when does compound interest work against us? Right, credit card debt. And especially, credit card debt, not only the interest on the principal, and then, that if you don't pay anymore, you get more interest on the principal plus the interest you paid the first time. But then if there's any late payments or over the limit fees, that will also get charged as well. So yeah, that is a good example. So let's look, one of the main ways we look at borrowing is thinking about loans. And do you, the people you work with, understand how loans work? And so it's important to know that loans have an application process either at your banking institution, whether it's a bank or a credit union, or if you're looking at other finance places. So you have to fill out an application that typically talks about, your background information, your salary, your other debt, might even ask about personal references. The application is then turned into that financial institution. People there review it and they decide whether or not it's going to be approved or it's going to be denied. And during that approval process, if it is approved, the percentage of interest, the APR, your interest will be determined looking at your credit worthiness and that kind of stuff. And if it is denied, it's also probably because they're looking at your credit worthiness. So what exactly does credit worthiness means when it comes to borrowing? Well, there's the 3 C's of credit. And the first one is capacity. And that is what is the individual's ability to repay the loan. And that can include amount and sources of income, their steadiness of income, so years with the same employer, amount of living expenses. So is there debt, alimony, child support? What other things do they have? Who are they all responsible for? And their level of education and training. The next C is character. What is the individual's reliability to repay the loan? So this is when they're looking at their credit score and credit history, their years of living at the same address, if there's a criminal record, and the quality of character and references. So they'll actually ask for people who can vouch for you or not. And then they'll also look at your collateral, thinking about what assets does the individual own that could be sold to repay the loan. And this is especially true when when you think about those loans that are unsecured. So a credit card, your spending limit, APRs, personal loans that aren't tied to anything. So they'll look at amount of financial assets, so your savings, stock and bond holdings, 401ks, that kind of stuff. And they'll also look at market value of real assets. So does the person own any land? Do they own a home? Do they have a car, a boat, electronics, jewelry, antiques, precious metals? All those sorts of things are all the 3 C's of credit. And they look at them and they decide, is this something that they are going to approve or deny looking at somebody who would like to borrow some money. So we have 2 scenarios here. The first one is, would you lend money to this person who has requested a loan for $60,000 for a new sport utility vehicle? And as you can see here, their annual household income is about $80,000. They've been working for 6 years and they're a college graduate, and their monthly debt payment is 10% of monthly income. So as we look at their capacity, would you give them a thumbs up or would you give them a thumbs down? I think for this person, I'd give them a thumbs up on just capacity alone. And so then we look at their character and we see a FICO score of 400. They have been living at the current address for only 2 months. They have a criminal record of 1 felony and their length of credit history is 6 years using a major credit card, and that's it. So for character, are we thumbs up, thumbs down, or not sure? Sarah, what would you give them?
I'm a little concerned about the credit score, and we're going to be
Mhm.
talking more about that.
Yep.
It's a little low.
Yep.
I'm also concerned about the felony, perhaps, but they've got 6 years using a major
Mhm.
credit card. 2 months at their current address. I'd like to see them more stable in housing. So
Mhm.
questionable in that area for
Yeah.
me.
Yep. Jen gave him a thumbs down. So, and did Melitha too. And so, probably a thumbs down for character, or maybe halfways, but not really there. And then we look at their collateral. What do they currently have? They have $200 in their checking account. They have $1,000 in their savings account. They're a renter, so they don't have home equity. And their current vehicle is $3,000. So this would be a secured debt because the $60,000 would be secured by the sport utility vehicle. However, when we're looking at all three of their capacity, character, and collateral, most places would probably deny this loan request for the sport utility vehicle because of the character as well as the collateral being available for this. All right. So we do have another example. And so this one's a little bit different. This person is looking for $2,000 for a new computer. They have an annual household income of $25,000, plus they earn $100 of interest from an account. They've worked for their employer for 2 years, and they do have some vocational training. And their monthly debt payments are 30% of their monthly income. So capacity, this one's not quite a full thumbs up, probably for $2,000 loans, but it's not, I wouldn't give it a complete thumbs down. You can feel free to agree to disagree or to just disagree with me. Their character, they have a FICO score of 650. They've been living at their current address for 2 years. They do have a minor traffic violation, and their length of credit history is 3 years using a major credit card. For collateral, they do have $1,000 in their checking account. They also have $0 in a savings account. They're also a renter, and their current car is $5,000. So if you would, in the chat, would you approve this person for a $2,000 loan for a computer, or would you deny this person for a $2,000 loan for their computer? Jen says they would approve them. Letha, Diana, yep. Yeah, so I agree. This would be something, $2,000. They have 1,000, over half of it. Plus there is a computer to take back. And so, this would be somebody that would be a good risk for the financial institution versus this one I would say would be a little bit of an adverse risk for for me if I was a loan officer. So it is, this is what you're looking at, or loans lenders are looking at when people are putting in requests for loans and stuff as well. It's also important to understand, like, there's multiple types of debt or reasons why are we borrowing money. Student loans, which somebody mentioned, they have a son who'll be going back, so that's something to be concerned about, whether it's for the student themselves or them as the parent. Medical debt, payday loans, auto loan titles, and rent to own. So we're just going to cover a little bit more about, if you do have this type of debt or you're looking to borrow, what should you do? So student loan debts, it's important to get organized and to understand the different types of loans that are available for student loan debts. And, to understand, what does this mean? So a Perkins loan is somebody who has exceptional financial need. However, it's not available in every school. So you may or may not see that depending on where a person is applying for. A Stafford subsidized loan means that the interest is paid by the federal government while the student is in school and then during authorized deferment. So student loans were deferred for a year and a half, almost 2 years. And so no interest was accruing during that time. And with this, no interest is accruing while that person is in college, at least full time. I think it's at least half time they have to be. Or if they have a Stafford unsubsidized loan, they are already accruing, as soon as they take out that loan, interest rates are accruing and being put onto their principal balance. There's also PLUS loans, which are offered to parents of students enrolled in college at least half time and must be used for college tuition and expenses. And that is on, the parents to repay if the student is unable to. And then there's also self loans, and self loans are long-term, low-interest student loan offered by the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, and rates are typically lower than any private loans, variable interest rates. So make sure you check. If you're not in Minnesota, you'll want to check with your Office of Higher Education to see if they have other loan options as well. And then private loans would be any loans that are acquired from a bank or another financial institution that are not federally funded student loans. And when you're looking, I know we have somebody who's starting this process. It's important to understand the differences and to understand where a loan is coming from. I have a friend who went to vet school and thought she took out a federal loan, and it was actually a private loan, and thought she was having money deferred or her loan payments deferred, and they weren't being deferred during COVID, and kind of got her into some trouble. So if you do have student loans, make sure that you're ready to pay on time and avoid late payments. If you are in default, you can always call the servicer, to find out how to rehabilitate the loan. And if you don't pay, your loans, you do go into default, and then collection can add giant fees and garnish your paycheck, as well as intercept some tax refunds. There are some options for a federal loan to look at to help you out. And you can get specifics at studentaidhelp.edu.gov. There is also loan forgiveness, where a federal student loan can sometimes be canceled if you become permanently disabled. And it could also be canceled after 10 years of on-time qualifying payments if you work in a certain nonprofit setting like medical, law enforcement, military, Peace Corps, or VISTA programs, as well as some teaching jobs as well. So those might be good options to look at too. If you are struggling to pay your student loans, you can always consider deferment, which applies to AmeriCorps, VISTA, Peace Corps, or active duty status. While you're still in school, loans will still grow in interest, but no payment will be needed until you stop school. And forbearance is when you hold repayment if you have a period of unemployment or unexpected emergency expenses. The loans still grow with interest, and there are time limits on how long they can be in forbearance for people. And sometimes people just forget that they have student loans or are not sure how much student loan that they have, and they can check that out as well. So another thing is to think about is medical debt. 30% of Americans reported trouble paying medical bills or having medical debt. And typically credit reporting companies must wait 6 months before they include past due medical debt on credit reports. So, when you're looking at medical debts and borrowing for them or not, know what your insurance covers. There's usually an open enrollment once a year if it seemed like I paid a lot this year, I think my insurance should cover more. Make sure you have the plan that fits your needs, your family needs at the time. Make sure to keep good records and review your medical bills carefully. Make sure they're in network or were charged in network and not out of network, all that kind of stuff. It is possible to dispute medical bills and you can negotiate bills for a possible reduction. You can also get repayment plan and agreements in writing, and make sure to act quickly to resolve issues. And don't pay medical bills on credit cards unless you can pay the balance. Most medical places are willing to work with you to set up a payment plan, so you don't have to go to a bank or put it on your credit cards to be able to afford your medical bills. But it is one of the places. Payday loans is another place that people often go to borrow some money. So they are in a cash advance short-term loan. Typically it's for $500 or less and will be due the next payday. So if the person gets paid once a week, they'll expect it in the next week. If it's every 2 weeks or once a month, then it's that. The cost of loan can be $10 to $30 per $100 borrowed, but that can also be more expensive than that. And a 2-week $15 fee per $100 is almost a 400% annual percentage rate. And typically somebody who takes a payday loan, it will take them 5 months to be able to repay that payday loan. And they will use the methods that they were trying to avoid, like asking friends or family for help, selling items, picking up extra hours, that had they just done that at the beginning, they wouldn't have had to pay all of that 400% APR. We will share a link to payday loans if it's something that you would in our follow-up email. There's a nice little video from Pew Research that talks about payday loans and how exactly people get into trouble with them to help understand that. So our next, place to borrow is auto title loans, and these are short-term cash loans typically you need to own the car free and clear. You do give the lender the car title to borrow the money, and you can borrow up to 50% of the car value. It's approximately 300% for a 30-day single payment, and more than half of the borrowers are unable to repay, so need to take 3 consecutive loans to repay. And your vehicle is repossessed if unable to pay. So this is probably not our best strategy for borrowing, is doing an auto tow lines. You do want to make sure that the company is licensed to make auto title loans. Don't borrow more money than you can afford to repay in the time due. So, if you're like, well, I'll still be hurting in when I get my next paycheck, maybe this isn't the best option for this person. Make sure to read a contract thoroughly to understand the terms and costs before signing, and then consider what are some other alternatives that you can do instead of having to take an auto title loan as well. So rent to own, I think most people we may have bought things like this, but it's typically used to get consumer goods, so furniture, electronics, appliances. This is where you rent the items, and then you have the option to purchase them in one of 2 ways: by continuing to make the payments for a specific period of time, or just paying off the balance during the term of the contract. Items rented or purchased this way tend to be more expensive in the end than if you bought them outright. And if you miss a payment, the rent to own company can take them back. You also have the option to return the item at any time. If you return the item, you don't get a refund of the money that you have already paid. So it may not be the best option as well.
Sam, I've got a great story on a rent to own. My husband and I have been married for 30 some years, but his roommate right before we got married, or I guess maybe it was right after we got married, did a rent to own on a refrigerator, and I've never seen this since, but they had it was like a pop machine. He had to feed this refrigerator quarters to keep it going, and then they would come and take the quarters as his monthly payment.
Wow.
And so there was a pretty major consequence. If he didn't feed this refrigerator quarters, the food would spoil.
Yeah.
But it was just really bizarre. I've never seen anything like it since.
Yeah, that is really, really bizarre. Interesting. Um, I can't, yeah. Man, if you need quarters for your refrigerator and the washer and dryer, that would not be fun. So some people do look at other additional, yeah, Jen said, I bet a guaranteed payment. I was thinking the same thing.
No, right? Great
yeah,
motivation.
yeah, it was, but yeah, to have somebody come in and have to take the quarters out would be interesting. So there are other places that people do go to borrow money from. So a pawn shop, we talked a little bit about pawn shop loans where they hold, the watch, the piece of jewelry, the gun, the whatever it is that you're willing to sell, so that you can get cash on hand. And then you can pay that back or come back and repurchase it outright. Typically, it's not a good deal by any means. You'd be better off just selling something at a pawn shop that you didn't want to get back if possible. And then buy now, pay later loans have been on the rise. If you are as old as I am or older, you probably know it as layaway plans, but those are coming and increasing again. And there are some, just a few issues about the buy now, pay later, that people are stretching their budgets and then getting into trouble because they need to extend and increase an interest rate. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau also has a great video on this that we'll include in the email, that talks about 4 things you should know to help people understand why this may not be their best option. And I have to say, as somebody who grew up hearing about layaway, they're really doing a great job marketing the buy now, pay later loans to people, and having it look a little different. So have you heard of other loans or borrowing options that people have used or that you have experience with or have concerns about?
Well, we can move on to the strategies here. And as folks think of other things, definitely put those in the chat.
Mhm.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jen. I hear a
Yep.
lot of people asking about, consolidation loans. Sam, do you want to address consolidation loans?
Well, I think we're talking about them in the strategies, right?
Oh, I'm not sure we did include consolidation loans. Let's put that on hold and we'll see. And I put the slides together. We'll see here. And if not, we'll be sure to address it at the end for sure.
Yes.
Thanks, Jen. All right. What strategies do you recommend for being a smarter borrower? What are some ideas that you have? Oh. Yeah, Jen. Yep. And that makes you nervous because most people don't stop using the credit cards. Yeah. When they consolidate. Yeah. What are some strategies to be smarter about borrowing? Well, we have a bunch we're going to share, but we wanted to tap into your thoughts.
Yes, somebody shared, said, do not spend more than you make. If you can, save up for a purchase or at least the down payment. Yep. And then think about interest rates and fees as well.
Doing that research. Great. We'll keep those ideas coming and we're going to keep moving here because we've got a few more slides to go through. So our first suggestion is get a copy of your credit report, right? You need to know what's in there. For some people, they might not remember all of their debts. I do some financial counseling a couple times a month with gamblers who are in a residential treatment program. And you can imagine when they're deep in their addiction, they don't remember what kind of debts they have. And so getting a copy of their credit reports or yours or mine, right, will help us make sure we have a pretty clean picture of what's going on and what's being reported. And we want to make sure that everything's accurate in that and so that we can address any mistakes because those mistakes might be hurting us. Also, in addition to, well, I should go back to this. I failed to say we all qualify for a free copy of our credit reports at annualcreditreport.com. You can get a free report from each of the three main credit bureaus. So Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Some people will just request all three at once, or others will stagger those throughout the year. Get one now, 4 months from now, get the second one, 4 months from then, get the third one, and then we're into the new year. With this, you get just the report and not the score, but we encourage you to get the report. Again, make sure everything is accurate and that you're aware of everything. The other piece of that puzzle is the credit score. And we show an example here of the FICO score, and there's several different formulas or types of credit scores, but the FICO score is used by, I think like 90% of the top lenders are using the FICO score. So it's the most common one. Oh, thanks, Sam. You're keeping me up to date there. Scores range from 300 up to 850, and there's several components in how those scores are developed. So the biggest one is payment history, 35%. So making your payments on time, 30% on amounts owed. You want to keep that at a reasonable level. You don't want to be maxing out credit cards. 10% on I can't read that green. There we go. The credit mix, 15% on the length of credit history, and 10% on new credit. And then you can see over on the right-hand side there, the difference between a poor score all the way up to an exceptional. So we all should be striving to be exceptional in this area and taking steps to increase our credit scores. My coworker Nikki and I will be doing a whole webinar on credit reports and scores in a couple of weeks, and we'll be able to give you that date at the end. So we're not going to spend much time on this, but check out your credit report and your credit score. The next suggestion we have, an example here is to see how those credit scores impact our borrowing. So we have two examples here. The first is a 30-year $200,000 mortgage. So we're buying a house. The person on the left has a credit score of $660. The person on the left has a 720. All right. The person on the left with 660, they qualified for a 3.07 mortgage, whereas the person with the better score got a better interest rate. And so that resulted in a difference of a monthly payment of, it looks like about $41. But if you look at the life of over the life of that loan, so over those 30 years, we are looking at $15,000 difference, right? And how much interest they paid. So for me, that would be a car, right? So having a better credit score will get us those better rates and save us money over the long term. On the bottom half of this chart, we have an example of a car loan, $25,000 for a car for 60 months, over 5 years. The person on the left with the 660 credit score got a 7.146 APR, annual percentage rate. Now look at the amazing difference. And this is just for an example. People would have to go check out credits rates and see what they would qualify for. But in this example, the person with the 720 credit score got in at a 3.719. So we're looking at a $40 difference on that monthly payment. But when you think about that over 60 months or 5 years, it is about twice the amount on the total interest paid. So working to be exceptional with your credit score can really pay off with big dividends down the road. The next strategy we suggest for folks is to develop a debt log. And this is just a tool that is offered through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And we'll provide a link for this in the follow-up email that we'll send in the next couple days, along with a PDF of the PowerPoint slides. But you could use a plain piece of notebook paper. But what we want to do is have you identify what are all those debts, and we want to get that full picture. So it's honesty time. And if you have a partner or a spouse, it's bringing them to the table so you can get that full family picture. And you want to look at the debts. There's also space on this form to look at when is it due. Are we up to date or are we current? What's the balance? What's the interest rate? And what's the intended or the payoff date or your goal to get that paid off? So having all of this information in one spot is powerful, because it now allows the individual to start making decisions about what to do with that debt. And it can help you start prioritizing those debts as well. What's most important to me and why? The next suggestion or strategy will use some of that information on that debt log, but it's developing a spending plan or a budget, looking at income, expenses, and then working to balance that bottom line, either by cutting expenses or increasing income. And for many people, when they're addressing debt, they will really work on their spending plan to cut expenses or increase income, or do both of those so they can allocate more dollars to get the debts paid off. And I believe last week, Sam, we did a webinar on budgeting. She's shaking her head yes. And at the end of this series, about 30 days afterwards, we'll be sending out a playlist or a link to all of the recordings for all of the webinars. So if you didn't get to participate in the spending one, or if you're not able to participate in the credits report and scores one in a couple weeks, no worries, you'll eventually get the links for those recordings. The next strategy is to develop to take a look at what is your debt to income ratio. And so a debt to income ratio is really kind of a benchmark for planning. All right. And we're going to look at a couple different ways to do this. This first one looks at debt to net income. So we're looking at take home pay. And so again, it identifies current debt usage and your capacity to take on more debt. So what we do is we take those monthly debt payments, divide that by the net income, and that'll give us the the debt to net income ratio. And so when we look at the debts to include, with this one, we are not including rent or a first mortgage. All right. So when we did our formula, we actually took it, would have come out, I think, 0.21. We took it times 100 to get our percentage number. So this person has a debt to net income ratio of 21%. But what does that mean, right? Is that good? Is it bad? What is it telling us? All right, so here I'm going to click. All right, if someone has a 10% or below debt to net income ratio, they're doing pretty good, right? So let's go through these and then we'll talk just a little bit more. If someone is at 15%, they're on the edge. And if someone has a 20% or higher, it's kind of a red alert, right? They really need to do something. And in this example, our person had a 21% debt to net income ratio. So now if this individual has a car that's on its last leg or its last wheel, and they're thinking, I'm going to need to get a new car to get to work. I need to do something, right? Should this person be going out and getting a loan which would increase their debt to net income? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Mary's saying talk with the banker first. What do other folks suggest? Should they go get another loan? Thumbs up? Or should they look at alternatives? All right. Yes, a thumbs down. Okay, other ideas on that? I agree. I agree. So this person might want to be looking at some other alternatives, right? Could they be carpooling? Could they be riding their bike in our nice Minnesota weather here? What other options can they use for transportation? Is there a community bus system? What kinds of things? And Mary suggests talking to a banker as well. I'm always a little cautious, though, that bankers like to loan money, so they may or may not want us to have that loan or not. All right. So as I said, I'm going to go back one slide here. This was the debt to net income ratio. The second type, real quickly, is the debt to gross. And so again, this gives us a benchmark for planning. And so we're going to look at total monthly debt payments. So we're going to look at credit cards, student loans, auto, other loans, any court-ordered fixed payments like child support. And then we're going to look at our gross income, which is everything that we're paid before taxes and insurance are taken out. We're going to calculate that. Here they did the times 100 to get our debt to income ratio. Now, obviously, when we're using the gross, we have more money to work. Yeah, go with that, Sam. Thanks. So what the experts are suggesting then for homeowners, if you have 36% or less, they're really considering maintaining a debt to let me get this right, a debt to gross income rate for all debts at 36% or less. So homeowners, that's the goal, less than 36%. Some lenders will go up to 43% or higher. The home mortgage is included in this ratio. In the other one, we didn't include the home mortgage. This one we are. Okay, so if this homeowner is looking at needing to purchase a car to get to work, or maybe it's more of a want, they're wanting to get a boat to get out on our Minnesota lakes, but they're sitting at that 36%, they might want to think long and hard. Now for renters, we suggest that they stay at 20% or less. Rent is not included in this ratio. If the debt to gross income ratio is higher than the guideline, for either the homeowners and renters, you may want to think about ways to lower your debt to put less pressure on one's budget. All right. So lenders may be using that debt to gross, or they might be using the debt to net income. So find out which they're using. That's more math than I was hoping to do today. Here we go. All right, so some warning signs of too much debt, and we're going to go through these a little bit quicker because we've got a few slides left to go. If someone finds that they're making late payments, they're getting late fees, or they're bouncing checks, they might be in trouble. If they're maxing out or over the credit limits, they might be in trouble. If they're paying only the minimum due, if they're mailing payments at the last minute, if they're paying one creditor by taking out more debt with another, or if they're experiencing stress, these are all warning signs of too much debt. And so they hopefully that'll motivate folks to take action. So we suggest if someone is looking at borrowing money, whatever it is for, to borrow as little as possible. So if I have decided I'm going to purchase a car, if I can make a large down payment, I'm going to be borrowing less. It's best to use cash when possible. We had someone who was talking about college earlier. If we can use earnings or scholarships and grants, or if we can come up with other dollars to pay for college and take as little as possible. Typically, we don't recommend funding spring break through student loans, right? So keeping those loans at a minimum is ideal. I really like this suggestion, and as I was digging around and coming up with items for the PowerPoint and the presentation, I hadn't thought about this one, but it makes a lot of sense. So to separate borrowing and purchasing decisions. So don't automatically accept the financing arrangement offered by the merchant. So if I go in to buy that car and they're like, yeah, we can finance that for you, right? I would say, no, just wait. It's probably best to shop around for the best financing terms. And in fact, it would be really smart if I were to go shopping around for a car loan before I even go and look at cars. So I can see what I qualify for and I can think about what I'm comfortable using. So separate those borrowing and purchasing decisions. Shopping around pays. So in this chart here, we're just looking at the difference between an 11%, 7%, and 3% APR loans. And in the second to the last column on the right-hand side, we can see that makes a huge difference on the total interest paid over the life of the loan. So the person with the best interest rate paid only 437 compared to the person with the highest interest rate paid almost 4 times as much at 1684. So shopping around can really make a big difference for folks. All right. Read all loan and credit card documents carefully. So this little box or this example here is called a Schumer box, and this was named after I think it was a senator who sponsored this bill. But all credit card documents should have a Schumer box, and it gives you this information so folks can compare apples to apples. So the APRs for purchases, APRs for balance transfers, which are oftentimes higher, or the APRs for cash advances, which most definitely are almost always higher. So look for this Schumer box on credit card offers, and definitely on other loan documents, read those carefully before signing. Pay bills on time, right? When we looked at how credit scores are developed, that was the biggest thing, right? 35% of our credit score is based on if we pay our bills on time. So that's a simple action we can control. Let me go back one here. Pay more than the minimum payments. If you make your minimum payments, you're making payments as agreed, and that's not going to hurt your credit report, but it's going to take you a long time to get things paid off, and you're going to pay a lot of interest over the years there. So we have an example here on this chart where people, you could pay 2%, 3%, 5, or 10% of the balance. So for example, we have $1,000 debt. If I paid a 2% minimum payment, that would be $20 per month. Um, in that $20 per month, only 5 of that is being applied to my principal. So now I'm down to 9.95, right? It's going to take me a long time to get that principal paid off. And you can see what the difference, the number of months to get that paid off at various interest rates. But if I chose, I'm going to make a bigger payment. So let's say I'm going to make $100 payment per month, which would be 10% of my outstanding balance. So I'm going to pay $100 each month. 85 of that is going to go to my principal, and then only 15% is, or $15 is going to go towards interest. So I would feel a lot better about that. We can also see if we're paying 8% APR on that loan, it would take me 10 months to pay that off, as opposed to, we're going to go to that top row. If I was paying only 2% on my loan, making only that $20 per payment, it would take me 61 months. So over 5 years to pay that off. So we can see how making a larger payment is a good deal. This computer, I was going to say computer program, it's a calculator called powerpay.org, developed by our Utah Cooperative Extension partners over in Utah. And they have this really cool calculator that helps folks look at how they can get debt paid off easier. And so you can tackle the highest interest rate, maybe the lowest balance or the lowest term. And so you go in, you set up a safe account. It's an HTTPS, so it's a safe space. You can play with that and look at different scenarios to help you make decisions. We also encourage people to limit credit card cash advances, right? Because we saw on that Schumer box that those cash advances are really high interest rate. You might also want to consider strategically closing some credit card accounts for a couple of reasons. One would be to take away the temptation to charge things and accumulate more debt. And then the other one is if you're holding a fistful of credit cards or a wallet full, by closing some of them, that can have a positive impact on your credit score. Definitely you want to be pretty strategic about which credit cards you might close. If there are cards that you use frequently, or maybe there are cards that you use to get perks, right? Gas money, or air miles, or Cabela bucks, or whatever it might be, right? Maybe you don't want to be closing those. You might want to look at the higher interest rate versus the lower interest rate. Another thing is to consider is that you get, I don't know if they're bonus points, but there's some benefits to keeping cards that you've had for a long time, because that shows a long history, and that helps your credit score. So things to think about there. We also want folks to be aware of credit traps, late fees, over the limit fees, those cash advances that we've talked about, skip a month offers. I've seen that more often at holiday time, right? So they're assuming people in November and December might be spending a lot of money on gifts and decorations and things, and they offer, go ahead, you can skip a payment, and yeah, I suppose that would free up a little money for me to use for the holiday, but interest continues to accumulate, or I might be racking up more debt as well. So those skip a month offers aren't always the best. Communicate with creditors. You can negotiate credit or interest rates. You can negotiate annual fees, late fees, over the limit fees. I have on occasion missed a credit card payment. I'll share one where I wasn't quite as responsible. We live on a township road, and it's really cold and windy out here. And one day when I went out to get my mail, one of my credit card bills blew away, and I didn't know that. I found it later after the snow melted. But I soon heard from that credit card company that I'd missed a payment, and I wasn't tracking that, and I should have realized I was missing something. And so I called and I said, I honestly, I didn't see this, and I can't remember. Maybe I did find it in the snow before it melted, but they waived that late fee for me because I had been a good customer making good payments. Now they're probably not going to do that several times in a year, but call them. Also, due dates, you can negotiate those. So if you get paid on the 1st and the 15th and your credit card is due, or any bills are due on a certain date and it doesn't fit into your cash flow of your month, you can negotiate those due dates. And you can also work with them on different payment plans. We really encourage folks, if you're anticipating that you have a challenge, you're anticipating a challenge getting bills paid, call those creditors and work with them. They're much more willing to work with you if you contact them than if they have to come looking for you. Yeah, Jen, great idea, having a master calendar, right, with all your due dates. I should have had that at that time. And then Mary does say car loans, loans for home improvements often go through banks. So she's found that going first through her own bank or credit union was helpful, right? If you have those relationships at those financial institutions, that can help quite a bit. We're almost finished here, and I know we're just a minute or two over. If you're having problems, again, in addition to contacting those creditors, we encourage folks to seek assistance. And one might be through a debt management plan. And typically those are offered by consumer credit counseling agencies. And they organize and execute a repayment plan to get you back on track. So what happens, and in this case, we're indicating they typically want folks to close their credit cards so they're not accumulating more debt. But you would make one payment to that consumer credit counseling agency. They in turn will have contacted all of those creditors and hopefully have arranged a reduced interest rate. So they then would be making payments to your multiple creditors. And again, those reduced interest rates, hopefully they're stopping those later over the limit fees, that kind of thing. So a pretty nice situation. They typically do charge a fee, but it's considerably less than what you would have been paying in interest rates and fees. You want to make sure you're working with a credible agency. So check with the National Foundation for Credit Counseling. Here in Minnesota, Lutheran Social Services, Family Means, the Village are a few of the big ones. Now, this is not a true consolidation loan, yep, which I don't think we did talk about. So in this case, a new loan was not taken out to pay these off. We're continuing to pay, but I would be making just one payment to that consumer credit counseling agency. Now, someone asked about a consolidation loan, and that's where I would go get a new loan and pay off maybe my 5 or 6 creditors. There can be value, there can be pros and cons to that. So the first positive would be, now I have just one payment to make instead of having to keep track of 6 payments, for example, right? It would make my life easier. Hopefully, we were able to get a new loan at a lower rate, a lower APR, right? So we know we're saving money. It wouldn't be very helpful if we went out and got a loan with a higher APR, right? So we're spending more. So we need to be careful and check out those APRs. I also, when people start talking about consolidation loans, I start asking questions about, are they secured or unsecured debts? All right, let's say I had those 6 credit cards. They're unsecured debt, so no collateral. If I lose my job and I can't pay those, it's not going to be pretty on my credit report, but they're not going to come get anything from me because there's no collateral. But let's say my mortgage company has been saying, oh, you qualify for a home equity loan. Go ahead and take that, right? So if I got a home equity loan and paid all of those 6 credit cards, that's really a consolidation loan, right? Chances are the interest rate would be less, but all of a sudden I have shifted unsecured debt to a secured loan, right? I've put my house up for those loans. Now, if I lose my job or get sick and I can't make those payments now, I've put my house at risk. Thank you, Jen. We will be sending a follow-up email. We're about done. So that's just a little bit about consolidation loans. All right. We also just want to warn folks about debt repair agencies. Just be very cautious about those. They typically can't do anything that you can do yourself by following up with debts, getting things paid. So just be very cautious about that. Bankruptcy, two types, and I'm not going to get much into detail here because we are getting well over our time limit, but know that chapter 7 and chapter 13, the two types of bankruptcy there. Chapter 13 is that repayment plan, typically over 3 to 5 years. All right, there are costs associated with a bankruptcy. And post bankruptcy, it can provide a fresh start. Folks really need to work hard to keep that fresh start, and we need to make sure we don't fall into whatever behaviors might have caused that bankruptcy. So we need to pay attention, try not to take on any new debt, any of those sorts of things. Whew. If you have any questions, please throw those in the chat. If you need a certificate of participation, please complete the evaluation, and I will throw that link in the chat here in just a minute as well. And if you are a University of Minnesota employee, a new thing here is we can offer wellness, well-being points, yep, for your insurance. So that's super cool. All right, here we go. Here's the evaluation link, and I will throw that in the chat. Takes just a few moments for you to do. We'll include this in the follow-up email as well. Within the next couple of days, we'll be sending that follow-up email with a PDF and of the PowerPoint slides, a few extra links. And then about 30 days after the end of the series, we are going to be sending a follow-up email that'll have those recording links and then another short evaluation. We're going to be wrapping up our Making Sense of It All series, saving and investing next week. And then credit scores and reports on May 21st, saving money when feeding your family. We'll include these in the follow-up email as well. We've got some related to recovery and health. We have some webinars in Spanish. We have some fun ones coming up on a family-friendly earth care series, so on pollinators and foraging, some pieces on finding balance, and then some related to housing. And one I really want to point out, if you like to read books, look at our upcoming book read. We're reading Brave New Home, Our Future in Smarter, Simpler, Happier Housing. Sam and I are reading that book, and we'll be learning and talking together. And then we have this final link, which we'll include in the follow-up email, so you can check out all of the emails or the webinars being offered by extension. Woo. Sam, anything else? We had a few extra slides here. This one took a little longer than anticipated, but any questions from anyone? Thank you for hanging in with us. I know several people had to jump. All right. Well, have a great day, everyone.